When we paint wildlife, typically we want them to have a certain beautiful level of that lifelike quality to them, that larger than life, that beauty that we crave. But sometimes it can be a struggle. So today I'm going to share with you 4 tips that you can use to make your animal portraits more lifelike. Realism can often come from a certain feeling that you get rather than having things perfectly match your photo that you took of that animal. So, these 4 tips are going to help you to create some really beautiful animal portraits that are a lot more lifelike and believable and beautiful and more interesting to look at. Now, before we get started, if you are struggling to paint realistic fur, then I highly recommend you grabbing my free guide, The Fur Fix. You can grab the link in the description of this video. So, my first tip is going to be to use a strong light source. So, in my opinion, having a strong light source is one of the easiest things that you can do to transform a painting into something that's a lot more dramatic and interesting to look at. Whenever I'm looking for a reference photo that I want to start painting, other than the animal, the second thing I'm looking for, honestly, is lighting. If you are paying attention to those photos and searching for something that does have a more interesting light source, it goes such a long way to make that portrait more interesting. So, good lighting is going to really help to define the form of the animal that you're painting, and it's really going to help to dictate the mood. Choose a photo of an animal that already has that dramatic lighting in there, whether it be dramatic backlighting. Maybe it's an animal at sunset and you have a really beautiful, strong, warm light that's blasting onto that animal, creating these gorgeous, deep shadows. But that strong light source is going to be really helpful for you. Now, light sources can definitely be tricky. So, when you're starting, try to keep them to be a little bit more limited. So, choose something with one strong light source and paint that. So, the second tip that I'd love to share on how you can make your animal portraits more lifelike is by using different textures and varying that texture throughout your painting. So, the reason why this matters is because animals have a variety of textures on them. Even if you're talking about one specific animal, let's say a wolf, there are different textures of fur on different parts of the body. Think about it. The fur on the bridge of its nose is going to be much different than the fur you're going to see on its back or in its tail. So, having that variation in those textures is going to be really, really important for creating that lifelike quality that we're after. Even within the animal, you're going to have some fur that might vary in length, but it also varies in texture as well. Certain areas you might see fur that's a little bit thicker and maybe more matte in quality. It's a little more crimpy. Whereas there might be individual hairs on a different part of that animal's body that are a lot more sleek. And as a result, they're going to appear shinier. They're going to bounce more of that light off them. So, paying attention to these different textures is going to be really important for adding that lifelike quality and also just making your portraits a lot more interesting. So, when you do pay attention to those different textures, it's going to result in your painting just looking more interesting and it's going to feel more lifelike in the way that you can touch that fur, you can reach out. It's more tactile and grounded in reality. And that's going to do wonders for making you have a much stronger painting. So, part of paying attention to this textual variation is also remembering that you should probably have some parts of your painting that are a little softer than others. This is going to do wonders for directing the viewer's eye around your painting in a really harmonious way. So, when you have the entire painting completely detailed, completely textured, it can be a lot. But if you have certain parts of your painting that you want to not be as much in focus, and make them a bit softer, it's going to do wonders for really dialing in the focus of your painting and just making a stronger painting overall. If you are looking at your painting in progress and you're thinking, okay, it's just a little too overwhelming, I got too much texture everywhere, it's too much detail, as long as your paint is still wet, you can take a really soft brush and do some light blending to try to take away some of that texture in areas where you want your painting to breathe a little bit more. Or maybe you want to push a certain part of your painting into the background. You want this important parts of the painting. Typically, it's going to be the eyes, the nose. That's the thing that you want your viewers to look at first. So as you move away from those most important parts, you can lightly blend that fur texture out, and it's just going to help to laser focus on those most important parts of your painting. So, on the topic of blending and blurring some of our features, this brings us to my third tip, and that's to keep some of your edges soft. So, typically, you are going to have hard edges and soft edges, and they can both be used really powerfully to create a really beautiful portrait. And this is where you can kind of deviate a little bit from your reference photos. You might have the entire animal completely in focus, meaning you have just as much detail as in the face as you do the rest of the body. Now, if you try to paint exactly what you see in that reference photo, you might end up with something really busy and just too much texture, too much detail. And as a result, it might be a little overwhelming for your viewers. But like we just talked about in our previous tip, you can use techniques to be able to make it a more harmonious viewing experience and bring focus to the points that you want to have that focus rather than distracting them with too much texture everywhere. Let's talk about edge types for a sec. Typically got hard and soft. When you have too many hard edges, it could make it almost look like your animal is sort of a sticker in the environment. Typically is not what we're going for. We want to make sure our animal is rooted in that environment. And soft edges are typically going to show when something is fading away or turned away from the viewer. And as a result, it's going to bring focus to what you want the person to be looking at. In the parts of your painting where the animal is kind of facing away from the light, you can use softer edges to kind of have that edge flood more into the background. You can end up losing some of those edges to some deep shadows, and it's just going to create a really beautiful fade and transition into that shadow. You do want to be paying attention to which edges are going to have each type. So there's a couple different ways that you can control this. You can actually physically blend them. You can also define those edges with contrast. You can have a really dark background and have a nice hard edge with crisp white line that's going to be outlining a certain part of the animal. So for the fourth tip, this is going to be to capture the gesture of the animal, not just the anatomy. Now, this one can be a little bit more of an advanced tip that's going to come with experience. It's also going to come with studying the animals that you want to paint, as well as just getting those reps in and trying things out for yourself. So when you're focusing on the gesture of the animal, you're focusing more on that energy and flow rather than the stiff, sort of correct anatomical look. So when you do focus on the gesture, that sort of flow, it's going to bring a lot more life into your animal portraits. And if you ask me, that's always a good thing. So one of the ways that you can focus on feeling the sort of flow of that animal is to make things a little more loose and actually flowy. So sometimes this means not following your reference photo perfectly exact. Maybe it's changing the background into something that's actually more harmonious with that animal and is bringing focus to the animal rather than distracting it. Sometimes it means using those softer edges in order to kind of blend it into the background, creating a sort of movement. Ultimately, we're letting the pose and that flow of the animal to tell a story rather than it just being a painting of an animal. Realism isn't just about detail and having things perfectly anatomically correct. Obviously, those things are important, but there's a bunch of things that are just as important and are going to make your portraits so much more powerful. So rather than just detail, we're looking for things like structure, softness, light, and that gestural flow that's going to help us to tell an actual story. So let me know which of these tips you are most excited to try next. I recommend picking one and trying to apply it to your work to see how it changes your artwork. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.